You and I are opposites, Francis.
Your eye is sharpening.
I don't know, what do you think?
Try another city.
The sunlit night follows American painter, Frances, who travels to Norway to jumpstart her career. Along her journey, she meets Yasha and develops feelings for him. He might be the best distraction for her. In the opening scene, we see 3 critics judging Frances's painting. They are visibly not impressed by the painting, calling it lazy, pedestrian, and even basic. They keep the critiques coming as Frances sits in her chair trying not to cry. After the failed attempt at the gallery, Frances enjoys a day at the river with her boyfriend, but things don't seem to have gone smoothly, as we can see her getting on the bus, vividly disturbed. Rushing back home, she starts doubting herself as an artist and coming to the terms that she might just be the daughter of 2 artists. Revealing that her father is an artist, she talks about his journey and how he started drawing animals in the style of Albrecht Dürer. Then he drew flowers for a vintage poster company, and finally trained as a medical illustrator. Despite drawing 16 medical textbooks, all her father wants is to draw a bird as good as Dürer. Her mother is also an artist. Frances reveals that she designs upholstery textiles for 3-story Connecticut mansions, but resides in a 1-bedroom Manhattan apartment where she sleeps with her husband on a pull-out sofa bed. Unsatisfied with her home, Frances compares their apartment to the Mondrian of claustrophobia, and claims that the smallest yellow square on the art piece is the only place everyone can breathe. That little space is the short balcony in their apartment, and we see Frances sitting down as her sister is already there. Curious, her sister asks why she isn't at her boyfriend's house, and Frances reveals that they've broken up. Returning inside, Frances is bombarded by questions from her parents about the breakup, making her regret telling them even more. As her father yells at her for not having a steady job, her mother notices that she has a leech on her, so they go to the sink to take it out. Just as Frances tells her father that she's waiting for the job offer in Tokyo, she receives a text message saying that another artist has been picked. As they sit down to enjoy dinner, Frances notices her sister playing with her hands, and looking down she notices a ring on her ring finger. She reveals that she's engaged and that she got proposed to while posing like the Statue of Liberty. Not liking the fact that his daughter will be marrying a man he doesn't like, he reveals that he and their mother are getting divorced. On top of that, he lets the girls know that there won't be a house, so it would be best for Frances to find somewhere to stay. Laying in bed late at night, Gaby can't help but worry about the divorce. Frances has come to terms with it, but once Gaby asks whether she believes in love, Frances doesn't know what to say. The following morning, we see Frances and her father going to the studio apartment. Her father is convinced that Gaby won't have any luck with a man like him, but Frances assures him that Gaby can take care of herself. Entering the studio, Frances is disappointed to find out that she'll be getting the badly lit corner while her father gets the good one. Her painting is interrupted by her father, who blows up the bed, but what annoys her more is the fact that he'll be staying with her for some time. The next morning, Frances has a meeting with an assistant who tells her that there's a job offer in Norway for Nils Auermann, and her job will be to paint a house only using the color yellow. Wanting to get out of her town, Frances agrees to go despite hearing how bad Nils's relationship is with his assistants. Getting off the boat, Frances walks to Nils, who's waiting for her by his car. She greets him, but he doesn't say much back. As they start their ride, Frances tries making small talk by complimenting his work and letting him know how big of a fan she is. During their whole ride to the house, Nils doesn't say anything. However, Frances doesn't shut up about the landscape and its colors, despite him putting some music on. Arriving at the house, Nils shows her around his house before taking her to her trailer. Before Frances has a chance to say anything, he walks off, leaving her alone. Getting into the trailer, the first thing Frances notices is a big sign that says "Welcome to Hell." Settling into her new home, she realizes that she's come to hell, but is positive that she'll get along with Nils because her work has been called the same as him: lazy, cold, and not working. While trying to get some sleep, Frances finds it hard because of the sun never settling and the curtains being too sheer for the sun. Hoping to doze off any moment, Frances is called by Nils, who tells her that she only has 10 minutes to get ready. Meeting him in front of his car, she complains about the curtains, but he doesn't seem to care. On their way to the Viking village, they pass the Vikings museum that Frances gets excited about. After driving through the beautiful scenery for a while, they stop at an old house. Entering the house, Nils lets her know that she'll be his apprentice while revealing that it will be hard work. Her job will be to paint the interior using the scheme that he had prepared for her, which is using numbered buckets for each beam and so on. They have to finish in 1 month because it will be inspected by the Norwegian Art Institute, so Nils warns her not to do any funny business. Wanting to develop herself as an artist, she asks whether there will be time for her to focus on her work, but he reminds her that he didn't hire her for that. After a long day of work, Frances makes herself dinner before brushing her teeth and going to bed. However, once she returns to her trailer after washing her teeth, she sees a baby goat on her bed, so she approaches it carefully. With time, the goat becomes her pet and Frances gets better at painting. While on a video call with her mother, she asks her whether Frances has been getting any boys while reminding her that her body is in its best form. But Frances doesn't want to talk about that. She also asks why Frances is looking so thin, so she lets her know that she's been eating brown cheese on crackers. Frances cuts herself a piece of brown cheese and continues to read the newspaper despite not understanding the language. Niels comes over and pours himself a glass of wine, grabs a box, and sits next to her. An unknown man carrying a suitcase walks along the road the following day. Getting to the bridge, he takes off his coat ready to jump, but something stops him and he can't seem to do it. Continuing his walk, he walks into the Viking village where Frances sees him through as they drive past him. She asks Nils to stop, but he tells her that they have work to do. As they're painting, Nils lets her know that they'll be going to town to get some supplies for his mother's secret fish recipe, and even invites her to his kitchen. Walking into the supermarket, Frances grabs a cart and decides to look around. While picking up a carton of milk, she notices a lady behind it, so she assumes that she's working there. The way Frances describes her is like the all-powerful angel who ruled the Renaissance and lived in the most wide-open place, but somehow worked in a cramped cube in her father's studio. Frances wondered whether she had the right judgment or whether she was looking for a partner in crime. While shopping for cheese, Nils comes to her to let her know that she's gotten the wrong kind of milk, but she disagrees, putting the carton back into the cart. Nils prepares the fish recipe once they go back, taking the fish's guts with no problem whatsoever. As they're enjoying their food, Nils thanks Frances for working with him, claiming that he wouldn't even be close to finishing if he hadn't worked with her. He asks about her work in New York, and we can see that Frances is struggling with ideas as she hasn't started working on her art yet. Opening the carton of milk, she tries to pour some into her coffee when it comes out clumpy, making her realize that she should have listened to Nils. Feeling unmotivated, she paints her window yellow and decides to go to bed. The next morning, she leaves the house to clean her brushes when she sees some locals plating with a box and arrow. Curious, she decides to check out the Vikings' village. Walking to the bright colors, she sees two women making yarns. Further, she visits a working shop where one of the workers recognizes her when Haldor walks in. He claims to be the chief, even though he's from Cincinnati. Frances asks what it's like to be a Viking, but Haldor tells her that she wouldn't understand. Seeing a plate with something shiny in it, Frances decides to smell it, but the worker tells her that it's a mushroom mix the Viking used to use as a tinder when it's dry. Being the chief that he is, Haldor asks Frances whether she's inspected their grounds yet, and Frances lets him know that it's quite remarkable and a relief to be in a place that holds a lot of history. Using her talent for describing things well, Frances compares Haldor to a Dutch postman that has more beard than face, while the other worker, Sigbjorn, looked like a newborn baby to her. Walking into the Viking Museum, the first thing Frances sees is the mystical Tree of Life, and she finds it quite appealing. Frances visits the theater next, where she sees a movie about the ruthless Viking battles and their history. The movie is cut short though, and while Frances wonders what had happened, she sees people getting out of their seats. Returning to the barn, Frances gets scolded by Nils about being distracted. He reminds her that the house is very important to him, comparing it to a cathedral. Already furious, he notices that she's not going along the pattern, so he gets up and tries to snatch the brush from her hands. She doesn't let go, which surprises Nils. Looking him directly into his eyes, she warns him not to touch her ever again before she storms out of the house. To ease her mind, she goes to a cafe where she orders a blueberry pancake. While waiting in line, she notices the unknown man from a couple of days ago, so she tries to talk to him. Feeling like she had already met him, she asks whether he was from around the village and whether he knows her. The man seems to be in his mind as he doesn't even hear the questions she asks him. Already feeling awkward, Frances decides to let it go as she heads to sit down. However, the man sits at the table behind her, so she fights the urge not to ask him something. Her creative imagination strikes again as she compares the man to Caravaggio's boy with a basket of fruit, him having heavy eyes and arms, but no fruit like the painting. Finally gathering the courage to ask him something, she turns around, but the man is gone. She decides to go to the market to buy herself the right carton of milk when she sees the woman once again, except this time, she doesn't say anything to her. Opening the door to her trailer, Frances sees a beer can with flowers in it and realizes that they're from Nils. Sitting down on the grass, Nils decides to open up as a way for her to forgive him. He knows that they're complete opposites and admits to not being used to teaching artists, but is sure that they complement each other. Calling her the orange to his blue, he tells her about the trick our eyes play when we look at the color orange, and then look at a white piece of paper, what we see is blue. Even though they're opposite colors, they do complement each other in some way, like Nils and Frances. On their way to the Viking village, Frances spots the same unknown man once again, but this time she asks Nils to stop. Getting out of the car, she tells Nils to go and that she'll be right behind him. Following the man to one of the houses, she catches up to him as he tries on one of the Viking helmets. Letting him know that she has good facial memory, she is sure that he served her a sandwich in Brooklyn once, but he denies it. Haldor walks in, so Frances asks him who the strange man is. However, instead of introducing him to her, Harold lets her know that the man has come to pay respect to his father's funeral. Frances apologizes for her behavior, but Haldor suggests she helps around with the funeral. The strange man doesn't allow that, so Harold leaves. Curious, Frances asks the man whether his father was Norwegian, but he lets her know that he was Russian. He only wanted to rest in the Viking village. Harold leaves the house to tell the uninvited guests to leave, but the woman with the thick accent lets him know that she's the strange man's mother, whose name is Yakov. Sitting by the fire, Frances assures Yakov that his father will like resting in the village since it's a very peaceful place to be in. So Yakov thanks her as a smile forms on his lips. She decides to show him the rest of the museum, so they visit the theater next. As they watch the historical film about the Vikings, Yakov asks Frances what she's doing in the village, assuming that the barn isn't the only reason. Frances opens up as she lets him know about the mess she's left in New York, her breakup, her sister getting married, and even her parents' divorce. He assumes that painting is her escape mechanism, but she assures him that painting is her only focus and that love was an escape for her. Their conversation is interrupted by Harold, who asks Yakov to step out because his mother's arrived. Vasily Grigoriev, Yakov's father, lies in the coffin in the freezer as all of them walk into it. Yakov's mother gets sad about his heart going out, but Yakov is at ease because his father is finally free. Everyone leaves, except for Yakov and Frances, him letting the treats fall for his father and her observing him. She compares his eyes to an alien, cosmos, deep sea, gas flame blue she'd never seen before. As she rides back to her trailer, she pictures everything that Yakov told her. She had asked him what he does, and he told her that he had worked in his father's bakery from an early age. His work is something that Frances envies. The fact that he wakes up early in the morning to make more art than most artists have is fascinating to her. His father is very important to him since he raised him while they waited for his mother to show up, he reveals to Frances. Yakov had compared the loss of his father to the loss of his own life, and that touched Frances so much to the point of motivating her to finally ask the girl at the supermarket to paint her. Surprisingly, the girl agrees, so they head back to the trailer for Frances to paint her. The girl strips down naked and sits on the bed, and using only the color green, Frances paints her whole. Time goes by and Frances continues to work on the barn, helping the illusion to be created. Parallelly, she focuses on her work making portraits of the girl using other colors as well. On the day of the funeral, Yakov can be seen taking it all in by himself before proceeding with the traditions. The Vikings pick up the coffin of Vasily and place it in the truck. They ride to the place he wanted to be buried, and with his coffin in their arms, they lay him down while all of them gather around the coffin. Sigbjorn starts the traditional melody, but Harold stops him to read the traditional speech. They start arguing about who's right, but Yakov stops them and brings the focus back to his father. He lets everyone know that his father had been the only family he ever had, that he brought peace into his life, and he will forever be remembered as a peaceful man. He's happy that the Viking along with the people had come to fulfill his father's last wish, so he thanks them for that. His mother chimes in as well, letting them know that they should do a Hebrew prayer, but admitting to not remembering it. Knowing the prayer, Frances starts saying it while advising people to say amen. They finally set the man free as they burn the casket where his father's body lies. After the funeral, Frances and Yakov climb the hill to enjoy some alone time when he hands her a bottle of liquor. Taking a sip, Yakov remembers the time he and his father would share a sip of whiskey after a long day at the bakery. Not able to hold it in anymore, he starts sobbing as tears fall down his face. Being there in his moment of feeling, Frances could see a moment of loss, an image she hadn't painted but one she had walked into. Walking across the woods, Frances asks where they're going, but Yakov tells her to just walk, assuring her that he knows where they're going. Going through the woods and walking across the river, they end up on the road when a bus stops in front of them. They get on the bus and Frances ends up falling asleep on his arm. They return to the trailer and change together since Frances has to go to work. Seeing Frances measuring the walls, Nils compliments her by telling her that her eye has sharpened. With time, Frances has to understand that the barn wasn't being painted by numbers but rather by geometry. They were using the minor angles of sundials and the unit grids of graphing to build a kind of monochrome mosaic, which Frances is very proud of. Asking to see her work after the inspection the following day, Nils lets her know that she'll have to finish on her own since he has to do the paperwork. As Frances is focused on her painting, Yakov walks in to tell her that he'll be leaving the following day. Looking around, Yakov lets her know that she has an incredible sense of color and air. He asks where Nils is and Frances assumes that he got scared about the inspection and that is why he fled. They take the covers off the walls to observe what they've done, and Yakov asks Frances whether she thinks that they'll pass. Instead of answering, she gets closer to him and asks what he thinks. The air thickens and the tension can be felt as they lean closer to each other and finally kiss. They end up making love and spending the night together, completely forgetting about the inspection. Nils walks into the house with the two inspectors and instead of art, they're met with two people sleeping on the wall covers. Waking up, Frances realizes what they've done, so she starts apologizing immediately while Yakov assures them that they're leaving. Returning to the trailer, Frances calls her father to talk, but he reminds her that Nils has never cared about anyone's opinion. She claims that it's different, that the house meant a lot to Nils, but her father discards her situation as he starts talking about her sister's wedding. Feeling guilty, Frances goes back to the house to see the pure art they've done, and how her non-responsibility had ruined everything. Frances stays for a couple of days more to finish her painting with the girl from the supermarket. Finishing her last painting, she lets the girl know that they're done, but the girl advises her not to care that much since she noticed that Frances is worried about something. However, Frances isn't the only one worried and sad. We see Yakov not looking so good as he leaves the Vikings village. The day for Frances to leave comes, and we see Nils debating whether to say goodbye to her or not. Tears fall down her eyes as she packs her stuff and gets ready to return to the life she once had. Harold and the girl from the supermarket pick her up from the trailer, but Nils doesn't come out to say goodbye. After a long quiet ride to the boat, Frances is finally one step closer to returning to her old life. Before getting on the boat, Frances waves them goodbye, which makes Harold question whether he should go home as well. He feels like a troll, but the girl tells him that she likes trolls because they're strong, never afraid, and they work in dark, cold places like her. And just like that, hope awakens in Harold once again. We see Frances at her sister's wedding next, and she seems to be enjoying herself. Her father is also there despite claiming not to come. And surprisingly, he decides to give a speech. He introduces himself as Gaby's father and assures everyone that he wouldn't have decided to marry such a man. Whatever her choices, her father reminds her that it is her voice at the end of the day. Her happiness, her misery, it is all her fault. Tears start forming in his eyes as he talks about his wife. He reveals that the only thing that made him less afraid of his misery is her, and he asks her to forgive him as he had lost track of things. Some time passes before Frances hears from Nils again. Enjoying her breakfast, she notices a letter with foreign stamps on it and is surprised to see that it's from Nils. Taking a map out of the envelope, she finds out that the barn had passed and it became a monument in the Viking village. However, that is not the only success she has, as we see her at the gallery once again presenting the paintings of the lady in the supermarket from the village. This time is different. The critiques are impressed, assuring her that she had gotten somewhere over the summer. The paintings are not only breathtaking, but they make the critics question whether they've met the woman or not. The light work is something they are impressed by as well. The gaze of the woman has been painted beautifully, making it quiet and radiant. Frances stares at them with a proud smile on her face as they give her compliments and advise her to stay on the path she's on. Having all the success so suddenly, Frances can't help but wonder whether she had run away from her life or whether she toured it. Whether she made the most of it or whether she messed up, and whether she got where she wanted to go. Fascinated by the painting, the critics ask where she went to achieve such success in such a short time. Finally, one of them asks whether she's going to be able to keep it up since she's back, but she just gives them a smile, knowing that she's finally reached her peak. It's only the beginning for her.